They called it the Typhoon of Steel. For 82 relentless days, American troops stormed beaches, clawed through jungles, scaled ridges, and faced an enemy who would rather die than surrender. It was the final push toward the Japanese mainland, the last stepping stone in a Pacific soaked in blood. But what unfolded on the island of Okinawa would leave soldiers, civilians, and an entire generation scarred beyond measure. This is not just the story of a battle. It's the story of sacrifice, of chaos, of humanity lost and found, in the roar of artillery and the whisper of kamikaze winds. This is the Battle of Okinawa, the blood-soaked road to victory. The final frontier. By the spring of 1945, the Pacific Theater had become a graveyard of islands. From Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, the United States had fought a bloody, grinding campaign, an island-hopping path littered with corpses and chaos. Each victory had come at a terrible cost. But now, just 340 miles from the Japanese mainland, stood Okinawa, large island home to over 400,000 civilians, lush farmland, and a deadly garrison of over 100,000 Japanese soldiers. To the American High Command, Okinawa wasn't just a military target, it was a launchpad for the full-scale invasion of Japan. Airfields here would bring Tokyo into the range of heavy bombers. Naval ports would support fleets destined for the heart of the empire. The stakes were nothing less than the fate of the war. On April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, and April Fool's Day, more than 60,000 American troops landed on Okinawa's beaches. What they found shocked them. There was no resistance, no machine gun fire, no artillery, just silence. But this was no surrender. It was a trap. The Lions in the Caves. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of the Japanese 32nd Army, had no intention of throwing his men into the sea. Instead, he made Okinawa into a fortress. Deep in the southern half of the island, the Japanese dug hundreds of miles of tunnels, bunkers, and interlocking defensive lines. They turned every hill into a killing zone, every cave into a tomb from which they would never emerge. Ushijima's plan was not to win, it was to bleed the Americans white. He knew the homeland was next. He knew Okinawa was the last chance to make the cost of invasion unbearable. And so, his troops were ordered to fight to the death, inflicting as many casualties as possible. Meanwhile, on the beaches, U.S. Marines and Army divisions found green hills and empty villages. But as they pushed inland, the ground would erupt. Mortar, machine guns, hidden snipers. The real battle was just beginning, and it would become the deadliest of the entire Pacific War. Storming the Shuri Line, the center of Japanese defense, was a massive network of ridges, caves, and bunkers called the Shuri Line, stretching across the southern width of Okinawa. It was hell on earth. From mid-April to late May, American troops from the Army's 10th and 96th Divisions and the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions attacked this line again and again. Rain turned the hills into mud. The stench of death filled the air. Soldiers clawed forward inches at a time, under constant artillery and machine gun fire. Japanese defenders emerged from holes like ghosts, launching suicide attacks, flamethrowers, and grenade charges. Every cave was a fortress, every ridge a grave. The Americans called it meat grinder country. They used tanks, flamethrowers, demolitions, napalm, but the enemy refused to break. Casualties mounted by the tens of thousands. And above them all, kamikaze pilots dove from the sky of fire while the ground war raged. The seas and skies around Okinawa became a slaughterhouse. The Japanese launched Operation Tengo, the largest kamikaze assault of the war. Thousands of suicide pilots flew from airfields in Japan, aiming to cripple the massive U.S. invasion fleet offshore. Their targets were carriers, battleships, destroyers, anything American. On April 6th and 7th alone, over 350 kamikaze planes attacked. Ships exploded into fireballs. Sailors were burned alive. Decks became charnel houses. More than 30 American vessels were sunk. Hundreds more were damaged. The Japanese even sent the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, on a one-way mission to beach itself on Okinawa and unleash destruction. It was sunk by U.S. aircraft before reaching shore, along with most of its crew. The kamikazes kept coming, again and again. For weeks, it was the largest suicide air campaign in human history. By the end of the battle, over 4,900 sailors were dead. One admiral called it a continuous nightmare. The cost of every inch back on land. The Americans were paying for every ridge with blood. Places like Sugarloaf Hill, Kakazu Ridge, and Conical Hill became names etched in the memories of the men who fought there, and the gravestones of those who didn't come home. At Sugarloaf, Marines assaulted a 50-foot hill for 10 days straight, only to be pushed back again and again. Over 2,600 Marines were killed or wounded in that one engagement alone. Caves had to be sealed by flamethrowers and demolition charges. Medics risked their lives in open terrain to drag the wounded back. Rain turned the fields to swamps. Corpses rotted in the heat. Disease spread. American units were rotated out of the line for mere days of rest, then sent back into the grinder. Meanwhile, Japanese soldiers fought to the last round. the last man, the last breath. In many cases, surrender wasn't an option. It was forbidden. The civilian tragedy Okinawa was not just a battlefield. It was home to hundreds of thousands of civilians, farmers, fishermen, children, and they were caught in the middle of the storm. Some were killed by artillery, others by air raids. Many more perished in crossfire or when their homes collapsed under bombardment. Worse still, the Japanese military often used civilians as human shields or forced them into labor. Some were driven to suicide, told by propaganda that the Americans would torture or kill them. Whole families jumped off cliffs. Mothers drowned their babies to avoid capture. The Americans, horrified, did what they could, offering food, shelter, and medical care. But the chaos was overwhelming. By battle's end, an estimated 100,000 civilians, a third of Okinawa's population, were dead. It remains one of the most devastating civilian losses in modern warfare. Last stands and final charges. By late May, the Shuri line had finally cracked. The Japanese were falling back to the southern tip of the island, but they weren't giving up. Instead, they prepared for a final stand. The last weeks of the battle were savage beyond words. Fighting raged in caves, hills, and villages. American troops discovered scenes of horror: mass graves, suicide pits, shattered towns. General Ushijima, refusing to surrender, ordered one final banzai charge, a desperate, suicidal attack. On June 22, realizing the end had come, he committed ritual suicide along with his chief of staff. The Battle of Okinawa was over, but its cost would echo for decades. The aftermath, the blood price, the numbers defy belief. The United States suffered over 49,000 casualties, including more than 12,500 dead. Japan lost over 100,000 soldiers, and as many as 150,000 civilians were killed. It was the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War, and one of the deadliest in American military history. The island of Okinawa was shattered, but the cost forced a reckoning in Washington. If Okinawa had cost this much, how many lives would be lost taking the Japanese mainland? Estimates ranged from 500,000 to several million Allied casualties. It was this staggering reality that helped push President Truman toward another decision, a weapon so powerful, so devastating, that it might end the war without another Okinawa. On August 6th and 9th, the atomic bombs fell, and 6 days later, Japan surrendered. Legacy of Okinawa, the Battle of Okinawa was the final and most brutal test of America's Pacific campaign. It was a war of inches, of caves and corpses, of courage and carnage. It broke men. It changed them forever. But it also saved lives by revealing what a mainland invasion would cost. The veterans who fought there came home scarred, but they carried a burden that history must never forget. Okinawa is not just a battle, it's a symbol of sacrifice, of resilience, of the terrible price of victory. The soldiers of Okinawa fought not for conquest, but for peace, for an end to the most devastating war the world had ever known. They landed on a beach of silence, and they walked into the roar of history. Through mud, fire, and fury, they carried the weight of a nation's hope on their backs. Many never came home, but their legacy did. It lives on in every sunrise over a free Pacific, in every whisper of wind over the cliffs of Okinawa, in every moment of peace bought by their sacrifice. They were not just warriors. They were the soul of a generation, and they walked the blood-soaked road to victory so others wouldn't have to.